So, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. But if you're in South Asia, of course, it's more likely that it's good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us in the third of this series, a collaboration between South Asian Women in Media and the University of Hyderabad's Department of Communication. The series is called Stories Without Borders, and we're hoping that this will become a living archive of the experiences and insights of women journalists from across the SAARC region. So we've had two interactions already in this series, and they've been really rich discussions. So we're really happy that this third one takes that richness forward and adds to it. And we have two speakers today from Nepal and from Bangladesh. And to introduce them, we have a SOM member from Sri Lanka, Dilrukshi Handuneti, who was actually a speaker in our very first webinar. Dilrukshi is from Sri Lanka. She's been an investigative journalist. Now she's a trainer, and I would actually call her a scholar of journalism, even though she's not in academia. She has a lot of insights to share, and so go back and listen to that first webinar if you haven't already. And over to you, Dilrukshi.
Thank you so much, Usha. I think it's a major privilege to be here and to introduce these two speakers. But I think before we get started, I'd really like to make a brief introduction of South Asian Women in Media. We're a collective of women practitioners from the media industry across South Asia, and we are all committed to feminist ideals, to collaborations, to networking, to empowering each other, and to learning from each other. We are also proudly South Asian, as I said, and this would also mean that we are very conscious of and also very care. We also care about our region. We report on issues. We analyze what goes on in our countries, and we also focus on the media industry as well as women journalists in South Asia. So, but I also want to take 1 minute to also sketch my appreciation on behalf of South Asian Women in Media. We were really grateful for this collaboration that has come our way. Thanks to the University of Hyderabad, one of India's foremost prestigious seats of learning, for your willingness to collaborate with SOM. I think we have two stellar speakers, but also our stories are very different. They're also similar. They're powerful and they're evocative. And you will find out in the next few minutes or so when the two speakers speak. These conversations are definitely an attempt to capture the stories of women media practitioners in the region, to record their perspectives, their power, their inspiration in a living archive. So this is the third of a 6-part series, I think, of these discussions. So I'll first like to introduce the first speaker from Bangladesh, Ayesha Kabir. She is the team leader of the English online news portal of Pratham Alo from Bangladesh. She counts over 2 decades in journalism and mainly focuses on politics and security, particularly from Bangladesh and a South Asian standpoint. Her career has taken her to Nepal, India, Pakistan, Hong Kong, and the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and to the Netherlands, and many more places. Reporting on current affairs, to speak at conferences, and to network and to inspire, as you do today. Namrata is a leading independent investigative journalist and a columnist from Nepal. That's our second speaker for the day. She writes a weekly column for the Rising Nepal and regularly contributes to Nepali Times. Earlier, she also served as editor of the Independent Weekly and as president of the Center for Investigative Journalism, CIJ, Nepal. She has also worked in the development sector in India, in Nepal, in the United Kingdom, and Kenya, working on areas that are really close to her heart. That would be human rights and women's rights. We're really truly blessed to have both of you today to speak to each other. It's a conversation, as we know. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I think you both can now get started. After you have that conversation for a few more minutes, then we can have the questions. Thank you so much and welcome everyone.
Um, so hello, this is Aisha.
Hi,
So good
Ayesha.
morning.
Namrata here.
Hi, Namrata. Hi. So Namrata, it's great talking to you, meeting you, and I think we've got a lot to share, our experiences, our thoughts, because we come from a similar region with similar work experience. At the same time, there are very big differences too. So I think there's a lot to share. Could I start by asking you, should I start or would you like to
Sure,
start?
sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Namrata, journalism itself is such a challenging profession, and whether you're a man or a woman, and being a woman, we all know it's a bit more challenging. So when there's so many professions out there, why did you choose journalism?
It's a very interesting question. I hadn't sat and thought of it, but when I did, like I grew up when I was in high school, actually. When I grew up, Nepal was going through this, there was a panchayat system in Nepal, absolute monarchy, right? And there was a big movement to protest against the autocratic monarchy in the country. And there was a whole movement of people who were mainly educated in India and had been attuned to the freedom movement there. Most of the, um, like the generation before me, the education in Nepal was conducted by a couple of universities in India, like the Banaras Hindu University, Patna University, Lucknow University. So the generations of my fathers and grandfathers used to be educated there, and they were part of the freedom movement in India. And but even before going to study there, they were the people who were voicing their concerns against the Rana autocracy and the monarchs, the Shah dynasty in the country. So there was a huge underground movement in Nepal
Mhm.
going on when I was a high school student in the 70s, right? And I grew up observing that, as my father was very much into the movement to free Nepal of monarchy, and he used to be caught, and his speeches and his writings used to be so radical that the minute he spoke or wrote, he used to be caught. You see, and I grew up reading and learning this whole movement, even as a high school student. And my passion to write and speak increased with me, when I was observing this movement. And as
Mhm.
you know, like that passion was there. But as you study in South Asia, the other reality is a student who does well academically is usually pushed or guided. I was never pushed into
Yes.
anything, but guided towards science. So I took science, but I don't regret it in the sense later on so my education continued in the 70s, 80s, and later when in 1990 there was a people's movement in Nepal which restored democracy. And for the first time in the history of Nepal, freedom of press was established in 1990. So I was teaching science, but when I got the opportunity, I heard that in a English weekly, there was opening in the sense because there was a British who had come to help, but she was leaving. And my passion to write and speak was always there. I was doing it, but to be a journalist kind of a thing was, uh, it was actually more than to be a journalist, the passion to write and 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 put in papers what was inside me. That passion was there. So took me to that to see if I could get that job. So the British journalist interviewed me, but she chucked me out saying that I had no journalistic work experience. But the editor, the Nepali editor who was listening to me, she was questioning, she was questioning on the current politics and everything. He was just listening. She sent me out, so I went, but she came running back and said that, the editor wants for some reason to talk with you. So then he asked me, when can you join? I said, but she just said I don't have experience, which I didn't. And he said, no, I was listening to you. One thing I needed was command in your language, in the English language. The other thing is I wanted to see if you understood the politics of Nepal, which you did. So that's how I joined. And Ayesha, to tell you the truth, at that time I didn't even know how to read, you know. So that was the passion of the whole political movement, which has thrown panchayat system out of the country and restoration of democracy, and for the first time freedom of press. That was the passion that got me into journalism. How
Okay,
about
that's
you,
great.
Ayesha? How about you, Ayesha?
Well, to tell the truth, I've always had, from even when I was a child, this love for writing, as you said, and the love for the written word, reading and writing. That was my passion. And like you, I too was a science student. And
There you
so
go.
I had no, exactly, and I hadn't even thought of journalism as a career. I hadn't thought much about a career actually, but my interest was in science. At the same time, my interest was in writing and reading. And but when I joined university, I switched from science to English literature. So then when I was right at the end of my university, I had got married, I had children, and also when I passed out, I didn't really take up a job then, but I really wanted to do something, but my children were very small. So then I started freelancing. And by freelancing, I got into journalism. And when I started getting my writings published in various newspapers and magazines, that's when
Aisha, you've gone. Yeah, you're on mute, I think.
sorry, I think I got muted.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
I'm
fine
so
now. We can hear you
Uh,
now. Yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so what happened is that um, um, uh, so can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
Okay, so then after I passed out and I started freelancing, actually, since my children were very small, after I completed my university, and I was freelancing and started writing for different newspapers and newspaper magazines and everything. And then when I did that, I started getting job offers. And then I joined a weekly magazine. And that's when I actually got really interested in writing about politics, security, because so much was going on. As you were saying in Nepal, your anti-monarchy movement. At that time, you were having an anti-anarchy movement of your anti-autocracy movements going on.
Absolutely.
We had a military ruler, military rule. We had an autocracy in our country. So those were exciting times. So I used to
Yes.
be, writing about that. And that's actually that got me into journalism. So I
Right.
guess we're a bit similar. And I couldn't use the computer at that time too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in 1990, you had that movement, the Yavul
Yes.
movement, right? And that was what
Against
triggered the
Irshad.
1980, yes, 1980 People's Movement in Nepal. And it had become quite a success. Unfortunately, it was squashed later on as as the leader of the Nepali Congress, Mr. Prasad Koirala, then took a softer stand. So in the region, I at that time I was just 1980 was the time when I did my school living certificate, but I knew about this whole thing that was going on because there was the whole country was broiling, and that passion
Yes.
continued with me.
Yes, and that happens here too because I was in university during the anti-autocracy movement, and the students here are very much involved in politics, very much involved
Absolutely.
in any movement. So yeah, that also fired me. So there was a question I wanted to ask you. I was saying
Yeah.
that journalism is a very challenging profession. So throughout your career, I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges. Could you just share us some of the experience you've had?
Yeah, actually,
As a
you're right.
journalist, as a woman.
Yes, I definitely I'll share that with you. And one thing just that clicked me when you were talking, like you said like initially, as your family was also growing, and then then only later on you join. You know, this is another part of women professionals in no matter any profession, and especially journalism. So when you were speaking of that, I was thinking, you know, like when I got into as a working journalist in 1990, I was actually married and in a joint family where at one point there were 30 people eating in the same kitchen. And my husband has five brothers, so his parents, his four brothers above him, and we were the youngest, and their children. We were all in the thing. And you and Jyoti have covered Nepal, you know, so you know how the history was moving. At that time, what has happened is after in the first election, the Nepali Congress got the simple majority. And but then once they got in power, the three main leaders in the Congress, Prasad Koirala, Krishna Prasad Bhattrai, and Ganesh Manse, there used to be misunderstandings between them. And there used to be, you know, like meetings in the house of these leaders, mainly Ganesh Manse in Tamil, you know. So at night at 11 o'clock, at that time, you know, I used to be the only woman outside his house waiting for, if it was a breaking news, waiting for the information. So the thing is, you know, being in a joint family, and we all know this in a South Asian context, you know, like, and that to the youngest Bahu, the daughter-in-law, you know, there are a huge lot of challenges. But what I did is, the challenges were there, and I had all the patriarchal system above me. What I did is I made sure I did my domestic responsibilities. And then I had a small 3-year-old son also at that time. But I made sure that I did not make myself unhappy by putting my dreams and passion of being a good journalist behind, you know. So I used to be out there middle of the night getting the information, and I used to come back, manage my domestic work, right in the middle of the night, write editorials. I have woken up at 3 o'clock in the mornings, going to bed around 12, getting up at 3 o'clock, write the editorials, finish my thing, and make sure in the morning, whatever I had to do, but make sure I was there and I did not miss anything important that was happening. So I think this is one challenge probably many of us have faced.
Yes, absolutely. In
Yeah.
fact, I
The other thing,
yeah, go ahead, please.
no, you go
I,
ahead.
no, I was just saying that when you were talking, it was like you were telling my story.
Absolutely, you know. So, and then on the other hand, the writing part, you know. So I joined Independent, the English Weekly, and there were three excellent editors there, men who had come, you know, in before 1990, there was only the government papers there. And these, Manoranjan Joshi, who was the editor who hired me actually, had worked as an editor in Rising Nepal. So now they also didn't know how to type. I didn't know how to type. So I was just sharing this with you. So when I joined the newspaper, I basically landed up doing everything, you know. So I started typing with two fingers. So they used to edit verbally, you know, and
Oh,
I started doing the editing, and that's actually how I learned editing. So this is something I
oh,
wanted the young generation to know, you know, like how journalists in my country, freedom of press was only in 1990, right? So I was a journalist, a woman journalist who had entered working, and I think I was probably one of the very few who actually wrote regularly. So the journalism training I got was on hand. I started learning to edit as Manoranjan Joshi, Ram Pradhan. These are famous names of editors in English journalism in Nepal. When they used to speak and edit, I used to type and edit, you know, so I learned. Then that was not what I wanted to do only, you know, I wanted to write. But of course, they all had their expertise and they thought it was their business to write. So my business was to manage Independent. Fine, I manage Independent. I learned that also, managing a editor, getting in, you know, good articles, contributors. There were people like Barbara Adams, CK Lal. CK Lal always, whenever he sees me, he meets me and he says, "Oh, that's my boss, first boss," and all. He used to contribute, you know, so wonderful things. But then I said, fine, I'm going to keep on doing that. Then I started writing and pushing in my writings, you know. So I think this is also an interesting part of my journalism that I wanted to share. And initially, that is to get, okay, later, maybe later. Then slowly I wrote like political piece. And they said, oh, Namrata also wants to write. So then it got published. Then there were lots of reactions, you see. It was an English paper, so the English reading community. And then I started writing regularly. So that was the other thing I think is when people are not seeing, even now, when I go around training young journalists in Nepal, um, the young women journalists keep on saying, ma'am, we don't get crime beat, we don't get politics. I said, I started writing in the 90s, 1990s, and my beat was politics. I got it done. Now, the world is such in this digital age. If you can do something, nobody is going to stop you. No, you just have to have your right. There will be challenges, but you have to first of all, you have to do your homework, you have to work hard, and you push your agenda and start writing. So that's how I started writing, then just becoming the manager of the paper.
Okay, that's
How
great.
about you, Ayesha?
Well, definitely a lot of challenges, especially in a South Asian country where politics are always volatile and when we're writing about politics. And the newspaper where I am working right now, it's the leading newspaper in Bangladesh. And as usual, the governments or the authorities, they never are very pleased with the newspaper or the media. And when you're a part of that, you do face a lot of challenges. And so throughout my career, there's been ups and downs. So challenges, let me say, like, as you were saying, at the family level, there's a general, like a social, I wouldn't say a stigma exactly, but people like within the family or extended family friends, their first question was that you come home so late or, your working hours are so weird. You are a good student. Why didn't you just become a teacher? Teacher is the profession for a woman. You can look after your family. It's got decent timings. So, it was that, always having to face that question. But
Absolutely.
the best is just to ignore, go ahead and do what you do. And then the next challenge, which I had, especially during the anti-autocratic movement, was we'd have to write articles and reports, or we would write articles and reports which were pleasing. And so then we would actually get threats. Maybe I wasn't, fortunately till now, haven't been arrested, but cases have been filed against me. I had to, deal with cases, had to run around with the lawyers and the courts and things like that, which is a lot of harassment, a lot of, yeah, you do feel scared. However courageous you are, you don't want to go to jail. You don't want to put your family into that situation.
Yeah.
So those things are there, but you just go ahead and, you have to be clever. You have to be courageous. You have to put it out there. Which, as you were saying, when you speak to the younger journalists, I'm always speaking to our younger generation of journalists, saying that when we joined our profession, what drove us was passion. I mean, journalists were classically underpaid and overworked. So nobody would join that profession unless you really had a passion for it. And so nowadays I see the reporters, they're very good, smarter than us in some ways, but um, because of the technology and mobiles and all that,
Absolutely.
tend to be a bit lazy. And yeah, they're paid much better than we were, and they have much more facilities. But I think some things never change. Sometimes it's not enough just to pick up your mobile and take an interview. You have to go there, see the person's body language, go to where there's say if there's an explosion. Recently near our office, we heard about there was this huge explosion and how many people were injured, and all the newspapers were covering it. But we told our reporters, don't just sit here and write about it, go there. And they went there, found it was nothing really dangerous. It was just a gas cylinder that had exploded. There was nothing political, nothing about it. So you have to constantly, as a reporter, just go and do things, actually go to the spot, or even if you're at the desk, verify. So that is my message to the younger generation, is that have a only if you have that passion for this profession, then join it. Otherwise, it won't be rewarding. The reward is in your own feelings, love for the profession.
I agree, absolutely. Aisha, actually, I also wanted to ask you one thing. Like
Yeah.
you've covered the Maoist movement in Nepal, and also you were there, I think, covering in Pakistan when
Yes.
Benazir Bhutto was killed. So,
Yes.
I mean, what was your experience as a journalist during these events covering, and what were the like challenges you may have faced, and how did how did you find yourself doing this in neighboring countries?
Oh, first of all, I'll say it was exciting, really exciting. And if I don't talk about authorities, I talk about just the people and other journalists, or other people on the street. Everyone was, I have to say, I had a very positive experience in both these countries. People were very helpful and all. But as in our own country, the authorities in any country, they're never too happy with journalists. So in the it was easy going there. Visas and all were no problem. And talking to the people on the street was fine. But the moment I speak to the government officials and all, that's when I found it very difficult. In your own country, you know how to manage, who to go to, who not to go to, how to get around them. You use your connections. So going to, a
Right.
country where you don't really have connections, I found that a bit challenging, but at the same time, very rewarding, because when you're a journalist, you learn, even when you're completely alien surroundings, you just learn how to make connections, how to, journalists in Nepal were extremely helpful, I have to say. And in Pakistan too, I had some, especially they've got some very good tanks in Pakistan and over there, they were very helpful. But there were challenges, say, in Pakistan, in places like in Peshawar and all, they're not used to see women out in the open. So, I mean, when I was at the hotel and they asked me, where are you going to? So I said, I'm going to Peshawar. Well, you're going to Peshawar, even don't to that area where you're supposed to be going. So I said, let me go, let me see what happens. And I went, and actually, I had some good experiences there. But there was always that fear in the back of the mind, how are people going to react? You can't control the people. But I think if you want to, you can tackle any situation. So
Absolutely.
with the yeah, so you've been traveling around too. You've been to Bangladesh too, I know. So can you tell us some of your experiences too, traveling?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's quite interesting. For me, as I was a working journalist and writing in Nepal, and because it was also English paper, and the English community, both within Nepal and outside, the expats and international, I mean, they used to read a lot, you see. And that paper was read by the English community, and very quickly, like like I had connection with all these different people who are interested in Nepal. So that was fun. But at one point, I actually went to cover a flood in eastern part of Nepal, and at that point, I reached the doorsteps of the people about whom I was writing. You see, and it opened my mind, saying that I need to know more deeper about them. So that's how I actually diverted for some time into the development sector and started working. But I continued writing. Wherever I joined, I had told them, like, I'm going to continue to write, and that was the clause I had. So I kept writing, and it actually gave me I went to deep nooks and cronies of the country, from east to west, high mountains, Himal, everywhere. And I actually learned the passion of my work to be more uh, beneficial if you write from the people's perspective, you see. So I started doing a lot of work on human rights and women's rights, actually. And so initially I was writing politics per se, but then I started bringing the angle of the people and making that the main politics, you see. So no matter what you do in any agenda of the country, the state, the development, the issues of the marginalized communities and particularly women everywhere has to be a political agenda. So I started writing in that language. And this took me as a development work to different countries all over the world, and definitely also Bangladesh, particularly microfinance, And I shared a lot of podium with Professor Yunus, wonderful work he has done. But I started raising the issue of microfinance becoming a industry, and how it was actually the sweat of the women that was making that industry thrive. So you have to make it from women's perspective on for the women by the women, more like what Seva Bank, which is a cooperative bank in India, Ila Bhatt was doing, So those issues I started, that is a development. But I want to talk in your question about my, even in the development work, I was traveling, I went to Kenya. So at one time I think I shared this with Jyoti a little bit. There was an election going on. This was in 2004, 5. The presidential election was going on. I was there for some other work. I was in the hotel, and my friends told me, "You're not getting out anywhere. You're staying in the hotel." I said, "Yeah, sure." But then later on, I got out, and there's something called Uhuru Park over there. That is the park where all the democratic movement happens. And there was a huge, the police, the forces with guns, and there was a rally going on. So I was actually uh, kind of pushed by the police. I was there running around with my camera and trying to send. I used to write regularly a weekly column, which was opinion and reporting, to a Nepali magazine in Nepal at the moment, which was edited by a very senior journalist called Yuvraj Khimere. So I used to send my regular weekly. So I went to cover that issue. And while I was doing that, I was actually pushed by the police, and I got hurt actually. Then I did my pictures. I went back to the hotel, but I made sure my friends didn't see that. Otherwise, I would be getting a scolding. And one another very funny incident, but not very significant, but still is, like you went to cover Benazir's assassination, but I was in Nepal when Benazir visited Nepal, so I had interviewed her. That was a wonderful experience, actually.
Oh, okay.
But when Hillary Clinton visited Nepal, so I had gone to cover her, and there was a huge, more than maybe 6.5 foot her guard. All the guards come from the US, and I was actually literally pushed by him at the door. I was going to enter Dwarikas. It's a very interesting hotel in Nepal. It has a history of its own, and I was literally pushed by that person. So these things are there, but there are other. Especially when you are out and trying to cover and write, you have to make sure that your networks are in place. Like recently I did, I'm now, like enjoying at this point after becoming editor and all. Now I'm freelancing and doing mainly reporting work. So I have done 2 human rights, human trafficking stories in, Luxembourg and Finland. And when I was going around getting stories and information regarding these, that can be a little bit tricky. That can be a little bit, but you have to make sure that you have your allies in place so that if something happens, you quickly get in touch and get help.
Exactly.
But we always land up hopefully finding good help. But as you and I know, there are many of our journalist friends who have had met difficult times, accidents, and also have lost lives during these situations.
Yeah. And I have to now, I'd like to just, another similarity I found with you, because I think it's inevitable in countries like ours and a woman journalist, we sort of tend to go towards development journalism too. And I've done a lot of work in the development sector too. And so I had some interesting experiences going around Bangladesh to very remote villages, to places where the women are not educated, extremely poor, ultra poor, and I've had some really extremely interesting experiences. Then one thing I remember, I went to this Chor. Chor is like a river island, you know, when the sometimes land comes up in the rivers and people settle over there. And I went over there and they had just started a microfinance program there. Grameen had gone over there and they had started a microfinance program. And I went to this home of a woman and she was standing there very proudly. So I said, "Do you know about Grameen Bank?" She says, "Yes, I've joined, I'm a member." So I said, "So what is the best thing about this? You know, you've become a micro entrepreneur. What is the best thing about this microfinance?" And she's saying, "You know what the best thing is? I've actually hold a currency note in my hand." She was about 45 or 46. Well, for the first time ever, I've held money in my hand. All these days, when my husband would earn money, he was generous. He'd buy food for our family. He'd buy us things that we need. But I've never held money myself on and bought something.
Absolutely.
And now so I found that extremely illuminating and extremely telling us how far we've come since then.
Right.
Because now in Bangladesh, things have changed a lot because of this.
Yeah.
So even in the health sector, I did some work going around to these remote areas. And what I found is during that autocratic rule, we had that autocratic leader, military leader, and
Yeah.
he was very proud about what he did in the health sector. So I went to see beautiful buildings. They call them the Upazila health complexes, the sub-district health complexes. Beautiful building, equipped, no doctors, if any visitors would come, they would send the doctors and the nurses on. Okay, but people use facilities. He doesn't, he sits in his own chair and we have to go and we pay for those things. So I experienced all of my thoughts. So good. You can people started and things had to change.
Looks like Aisha's
Hello, have we
connection.
lost Ayesha?
Yes, yes, it looks like we've lost Aisha.
Yeah, okay. The last few sentences you were speaking, I couldn't catch. Anyway, Dil, uh, uh, uh,
Yeah, so maybe we could, if there are people
yeah,
in the
Usha.
audience who have any questions while we wait for Aisha to come back. She's
Sure.
back. I can see she's back.
Thanks. The line dropped. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Is that clear now?
Yes, we can hear you, Ayesha.
So it felt good as a journalist when you go and you can expose these things and learn things. So I think, however much we're into politics, security, I think in countries like the developments and the people on the ground is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So no, I think I can relate with you, Ayesha. You know, like as I said, my passion for journalism started with the political movement in Nepal, the ousting of the monarchy, the panchayat system, and all that, right? But then as I moved on, as I was writing, and my stories were being, like you said, you know, you've been you faced cases and all. So in the early mid 90s, actually, two of my stories. One was the it was still a constitutional monarch time, you know. So there's something related with the king that had been I had written, and it was put in the parliament. But because I had proof regarding it, you know, I wasn't arrested, and there were other things. So as journalist, when you can see, you can make a difference, and then you start writing from the people's perspective, like you were saying about the women's issue and, you know, human rights issue. So that is another passion that drives us and makes us go on, you know. So and sometimes in the journalism world we have this debate, you know. Journalists are only journalists, not activists, you know. So I keep or whatever, you know. So what I feel is, without a passion, I can't be a journalist. I started journalism with a passion, and I keep on going with a passion. So if I do reporting, that's purely reporting. I don't put my opinion there. But I do also now have an opinion column where I put my opinion, and that will show probably the activism in me. So I think we are, that's what I wanted to say. But
Would you recommend
I think we're
to
pressed
any
with time now. Usha, what do we do?
If there are questions from the audience, we can take a few, or maybe Dilrukshi has some questions she'd like to raise. But we do have another 10 minutes or so. So if there are areas that you'd like to continue to explore for those 10 minutes, you can go on. But there are things that you wanted to ask Ayesha, or Ayesha, you wanted to ask Namrata that you would like to raise before we turn it over to questions from the audience?
Aisha?
Oops, she's turned over now.
Is Dil going to ask, or Aisha, are you wanted to ask or clarify anything more? We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I think you have
Aisha,
to
can
click
you
the
hear us?
phone as well.
Aisha, can you hear us? If not, I can ask a question, but it'll probably require an answer from both of you. So I think Aisha is ready now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dil, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a general question to both of you, and both of you have covered each other's countries, and that doesn't happen a lot. And despite what we speak about, not too many journalists actually get that opportunity to understand and physically go to a place and report on each other. How does it change your perspective? For example, when I come to Nepal or to Bangladesh, I do have perspectives that I carry from Colombo, but that is not necessarily what I experience once I am there doing field reporting. It's always different and far more rich, in terms of experience. Not too many journalists now get visas. We all know that South Asia is very restrictive in terms of letting each other into our countries. So what do you, and I know a lot of young journalists will be listening to both of you. What do you think? How do we overcome the visa barriers that our governments introduce, but how do we learn about each other, our countries, our politics, first-hand experience, and report on it?
Aisha?
Well, first of all, I think as both Namrata and I have been.
Ayesha, we can't hear you very clearly.
Oh,
Can you increase the volume of your...
I think she's frozen again.
So Namrata, maybe you could take the question and then Ayesha can come back.
She's coming back. Aisha is coming back. Yeah, Aisha? Can't hear you.
Namrata, you go ahead. I can't.
Yeah, but we could hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead. We want to listen to you also.
Okay, so I just wanted to say is that what my advice or our advice to the young girls or women who are wanting to join this profession, I think that one of the first priority is you have to think that, do you really have a passion for the profession? I mean, more than do you have that commitment and dedication? Are you willing to make certain sacrifices? Because this is one profession where definitely it's not an easy profession. So you have to be prepared. I think they need to speak to older journalists like you and me to get, to put things into perspective, because when you study journalism in university, it's one thing. And when you come to the field, it's one thing. And you see a journalist in movies and it's also very glamorous, covering a war, covering things. But in real life, there's no glamour in it. So they have to get their
Absolutely.
perspective correct. And another thing is, like in countries like ours or anywhere in the world where governments can be challenging, where corporate building bodies can be challenging, where different establishments can be challenging, you've got to know certain things about the law, what you can do, and sometimes because there's lots of loopholes in the law which you can use. So you have to educate yourself about those things, and build up as many contacts as you can along the way.
Yeah.
Namrata?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with everything you said, Aisha. And just to touch on Dil's point on, traveling to each other's countries and covering, many of us may not have, and we seem to have visited each other's countries also and reported in different countries or got stories from different countries. A couple of things is, first of all, getting money to travel to different places and to do stories, there's a financial cost, right? And
Yes.
as Aisha just touched, like I think most of the South Asian countries are facing two kind of censorship and difficulties at the moment. One is from the government. No matter what system we are in, democratic, autocratic, religious fundamentalism, whatever, and although even in the most democratic kind of a country also, the way in South Asia politics is progressing over the years in the name of democracy, the freedom of press is being curtailed. So to cross over that and do good journalism in your own country is a big challenge. And trying to move and get information from other countries is even more difficult within South Asia. Visa issue is a big problem.
I'll just
Luckily,
move into
being a
a
Nepali,
quieter room.
okay, sure. But
I'm saying.
being
Room
being a
taken for the
Nepali,
back.
one advantage we seem to have is, one is this beautiful open border between India and Nepal, and I think the whole South Asia should aim towards having that. But anyway, Nepalese getting visas to other South Asian countries and other South Asians getting to Nepal is easier. So that way I haven't felt difficulty. But on the other hand, the other thing Aisha touched about that I also wanted to touch is the corporatization of media. The corporatization of media is happening in such a way that it's very difficult for good journalists to get jobs. It's like in politics, it's difficult for honest, good leaders, political leaders, to get the tickets to fight the contest, because these leaders will never nod to the hierarchy of the party and compromise their values, right? So same thing with journalists. So good journalists may not get jobs either in the government paper, or now nobody wants to work in the government anyway, but or in the corporatized media house where they have their own interests too. You see, so the more you look at it, it's very difficult for good journalists to get jobs and be financially sustained, and on top of that, to dig and get informations either within your own country or from cross border. It's getting more and more difficult. But I think this is a time where I feel networks like ours, like for example, the South Asia Women in Media is a good forum where at times we can knock each other's uh, uh, emails and WhatsApp and try to get information. The similar thing happens with journalists all over the world. While I was doing this human trafficking stories in Finland and especially Luxembourg, it took me almost 2 years because of pandemic also, but I visited once, I went to different places. Then after coming back, this connection keeping on with them. So even without physically traveling, the virtual travel and information collection, I think that is very important. But in this digital world, the fact, like what Aisha was giving her tips to the younger journalists, particularly women journalists, is it's a blessing that you are in this world, in this age, doing journalism. And many of us had to do everything manually, writing, typing, going and getting information. But one thing, even in the digital world, young journalists should not give up is going and meeting your sources and getting first-hand information, and of course, maintaining the identity. I mean, protecting the identity of these sources. So that is one thing. But on the other hand, because of the trolling and other factors, we also need to learn, journalists like us, Aisha, myself, I think Dil is far younger than us, how to actually protect ourselves in the digital world. I'm not very savvy in the technology. I am aware of certain things, but not a lot. The younger generations are very good in that. But on the other hand, I think the younger generation journalists should know what it is to establish freedom of press in your country, and make sure you are more committed to that as a journalist rather than other issues. You see, so that's what I feel. I don't know if I answered your question, Dil.
I think you did, and the answers are different because you come from different places with different visa regimes. So, and also the experiences are different. Yeah, Usha, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted, yeah, I do have a question. And I was wondering, I mean, and probably all three of you can address this, but, I'm wondering how you deal with covering the big brother in the region, right? And in some ways, when, Namrata is visiting Bangladesh, or either of you is visiting Sri Lanka, there's a certain I wouldn't say equal in terms of power, but there's a certain parallel relationship you have with India, and I'm wondering how it works, when you are covering the big brother in the region. Yeah.
Should I answer?
Yes, please.
Well, when we're covering India, as you know, Bangladesh has got a sort of, to be very frank, a light relationship with India. We are definitely very close to India, and the love there is very strong, undeniably, because of historical reasons. In our liberation war in 1971, India was by our side, helped us, sheltered us, helped us. So it's there. But as all small neighbors next to the country, there's always the tensions too. So what happens is, just like in our country, when if we read anything which doesn't please our government, cracks down on us or questions us. To tell the truth, in sitting in Bangladesh, if I read any report which perhaps the Indian government.
Oh, sorry, I think we've missed her, lost
Yeah,
her
we
again.
lost her again. But I think her connection has been spotty. Jyoti's also remarked on
But
it.
she's coming back. She's coming back. Dil, you wanted to add something to this?
I guess I'm not a speaker, but I would say I would say that it's
Sorry, the connection.
Aisha back.
Yeah, she's back. Yeah.
I just wanted to give you an experience. Like recently, one of my team members had written an article about the border killing on in Bangladesh, and which was fine because that's happening. And we also gave the Indian version of the story too. But then immediately we got called from the embassy over here that no, you should, come to us and, get our version first before you report and all. So things like that. When the reports are good, thank you. But the reports are bad, and the big treatment.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just jut in while we get Aisha back again. The relation between Nepal and India is, I mean, everybody keeps on saying it's special, and it actually is. Otherwise, the two countries would not be having such a long open border, right? And apart from that, the religious, cultural, traditional relationship we have, especially in the southern border, the language, lots of things are so close and together, like, so we do have that special relation. However, what's happened is, Usha, the way you started asking this question on this relation with the big brother, India is actually trying to become more and more big brother rather than partner in South Asia, India actually being the biggest democratic country in this region, frankly speaking, if there was a far-sighted foreign policy in India to actually have a good relation in South Asia in such a way that we could jointly become a very strong polarized region, Unfortunately, rather than taking each other as partners and neighbors, strong neighbors. We may be small, big, rich, poor, that's a different thing. But strong neighbors, the feeling of trying to move ahead as a big brother may not be very suitable foreign policy strategy for India. That's what I feel. And over the years, what has happened in Nepal, from an absolute Hindu country, Nepal was the only Hindu country. But let me tell you, even when Nepal was the only Hindu country in 1990, when I did a story and I talked with lots of Muslims in Nepal, they felt very safe in Nepal, the only Hindu nation in the country. They felt so safe in Nepal, far more safer than in other countries, actually, So, but over the years, after Nepal has become secular now, and the left red movement, as the communist movement around the world was dying, in Nepal, the red flag started coming up, right? And of course, always this, anything that happens between Nepal and India, the China card is taken up. Okay. And I'm not going to go more deeper into this, but I think for me, like what I feel is there has to be a strategy to go beyond this and to have a foreign policy which will look into other aspects in this region where India becomes maybe the biggest democratic country, which does not have fear for free journalism and free journalists to move around its own country, and trying to have a relationship of partnership with other South Asian countries should be the strategy. But of course, it's a tall thing I'm talking about. So within Nepal, when we cover India, I mean, what do we cover? India's news covers everything. So the news media in India is so strong, whether it's audiovisual or print, And now Nepal's media has come up very strongly after restoration of democracy. We have a very good radio system. We have TVs and all that. But at the same time, this because in the digital world, information transferring across the border virtually is so strong, the saffronization. So even so everything then that's tied with the corporatization of media. So where is trade linked, and who are the business tycoons in Nepal? Where are the roots? And where, if whatever advertisement is coming, where is it coming from? Who's controlling that? Whether it's the government advertisement or it is the corporatized advertisement. So if issues of border come up, how do you play it? How does media play it? So I think that's how we see it. Aisha, I think you were speaking and the net got cut off.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know how much you had heard, but in Indian issues, I was saying everything is good with India, but naturally there are some areas which we have. We have border killings and other issues which we have with India, water sharing. So
So yeah, again she's cut off. So actually, just to sum it up, the relation that in Nepal, one thing that's given miscommunication is always this: the communist flow in Nepal is washed, the China tag is taken. But as far as I think, and if any serious leaders of the country looks, the relationship with India and Nepal has to always remain special and far more important as compared to our northern neighbor, But because we have both the neighbors and both giant neighbors, there has to be a strategy how to balance them, right? But yeah, well, Dil, were you going to
So
say
I'm back
something?
again. I was wanting to say that the two governments have got a very good relationship, but as we journalists, we often like to, dig a bit deeper. And so when we report about things like, say that India isn't giving us a fair share of water, or that our people are being killed on the border, or things which are a bit controversial and not very pleasant, that's when we get pressure not only from our own government, but we also get calls from the Indian authorities and all, very polite, not threatening or anything, but they're not pleased with us. They're not pleased when we do these stories. At the same time, I'm happy to say that activists in India, they are very supportive with the press out here, because uh, they support our cause. Because when it comes to human rights issues, whether it's thinking on the border or sharing water, just with when you're in India or in Bangladesh, people who are conscious of rights, human rights, and all.
Yeah, it's been just a bad connection day for connectivity today. I know that Dilrukshi has a hard stop when the power goes off. So maybe if there are any questions from the audience, yeah, Dilrukshi.
And
If
so
others have questions, I'm happy to. I think they should ask their questions first. Do we have questions?
I don't see any hands up.
yeah,
I
I'm really
have a
sorry, my
question.
internet is giving me a lot of trouble, but I just wanted to say it's not just any big, whether it's a corporate body, whether it's India or whether it's government, any big brother sort of establishment,
I have a question actually, if I may.
Yes, Jyoti.
Jyoti, please shoot.
I have a question for Ayesha. I mean, her link is so bad, but I really wanted to ask her. Ayesha, are you there?
yeah, I'm over here.
Okay, so you said you traveled in Pakistan as a journalist. I was just wondering, how do Pakistanis receive Bangladeshi journalists? Considering you've had this, this very interesting relationship between your countries.
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. When,
Can't understand one word, Aisha.
but the moment we bring up the question, Hina,
No, nothing.
hello, can you hear?
Yeah, now.
Yes.
Okay. So when I went to Pakistan, everything is fine. Even the government officials are fine. The people are fine. But the moment we bring up the prickly issues about 1971, about the killings in 1971, the genocide, or about sharing of assets and things like that, that's when they don't appreciate it at all. That's when they just, turn off. You're fine unless you bring up the 1971 issue. Otherwise, they're the friendliest of people that, okay, we one country, one family, brothers are separated. So I had a good experience in Pakistan. As long as the 1971 issue didn't come up, that was big irritating the things. Otherwise, it was a good experience for me working with the development sector there, with the think tanks there, with the journalists there, even with the government there. And everything's fine, but you can feel there's a slight tension does exist.
Okay, thanks.
She seems to have disappeared again. So, Dilrukshi, do you want to wind it up since we're past 5?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's just been bad luck.
Yeah, I know.
I just
Yeah,
might
so
pause.
anything else?
Jyoti, do you have another question? Anyone else? The last one in? No?
Yeah,
Okay, I just wanted to ask one thing. Is there a, if we give you 1 minute each, is there something, it's like the last thought that you want to leave, knowing that a lot of young people will be, who are already journalists or who might want to be journalists, become journalists in the near future, might, is there a takeaway that Namrata and Ayesha would want to share here?
Okay, I'll just
Aisha, go ahead.
say before my connection goes away again. I just want to say that it's a bit scary or challenging. But I also want to say
We've lost her again.
uh, can you hear me?
Yes, Aisha, we can. Yeah.
I want to say that there's no profession as rewarding as this, maybe not in financial terms, it might not be glamorous, but there's something so satisfying because you feel that, because without the media, nobody gets to know anything. What's anything good that's bad that's happening, anything that's happening, nothing is known without the media. So the media is a key. So being a part of the media, being a journalist, I think nothing is more rewarding and nothing is more constructive. So I would encourage people to come to this profession, the young people, but let them look before they leap into it.
Yes, I agree with you, Aisha. And also the thing is, the journalists of today, especially those who get into journalism now in this digital world, they have different issues to take up as challenge than what we have, you see. So um, the misinformation, disinformation, fake news, these are things that people who are getting into journalism should not have it in their mind that they can get the information through the tips of their fingers only, and not do the fact checking. These days there's this. I've been listening. There are lots of fact checking sessions and seminars done. Like Dill did one on the SOM conference at Kolkata. Excellent one. So actually, fact checking has been there always. In journalism, without fact checking, you cannot bring out stories, right? But the fact checking of now. Is easier in way that you can actually get a lot of information from the net, but on the other hand, to fact check that information you are getting in the net is also very important. So I think with uh, writing, getting information, doing journalism, getting easier with the electronic media, it is also challenging to make sure what information you get and how you share it so that it reaches the right people right way, but always the correct way. So that is, I think, very important. So I think the journalists who are coming up now are the journalists of the digital world. Welcome to this world. We need more and more young journalists, and we need more and more women journalists also. And from when I was a working journalist in the early 90s, when I used to go around print journalist, I used to be the only woman everywhere. But now when I put on the Nepali service of BBC Nepal in the evening, I get to listen to reporters, women reporters from all over the country, from Jumla, Humla, from the most remotest parts of Nepal. So that really encourages me. But again, when I look at the research that is coming out, that we've done a couple of years back, or even today there's a report somewhere, the fact that in any profession, female are still facing difficulties to get to the decision-making position. So when I look at countries like India and Bangladesh and Pakistan, I see quite a few women editors in different places. I was a editor in early 90s, but even now, if I look in the mainstream media of Nepal, there are hardly any women editors. So these challenges are still there. And the fact that the world, the media doesn't realize that having women as senior editors and managers in the media sector is not just to have women there. It is actually to bring the perspective in such a way that the information that goes out is the correct information, right information from a different angle, and it is beneficial for the country and the media houses, for the media houses to have sources and angle coverage from journalists, women journalists, together with men journalists, is more beneficial and more profitable. Various researchers all over the world has already shown that, but in South Asia, it still is not a reality, particularly in a country like Nepal. So I think my advice is more young people should get into journalism, particularly women more also, but get your uh, strategy right, why you want to get into journalism and how. That is the thing, just like what Ayesha said.
Yeah, thank you, Namrata, and thank you so much, Aisha. And hopefully, we'll have you on again at some point with a better connection and
Yes.
where we can hear everything you said. So I think Dilrukshi actually had a power cut, so she's not able to come back to wind up this session. So I will, on her behalf, I'd like to thank those of you who were here, and of course the online audience who will watch this at some point. We're hoping that young journalists and journalists in training will take away, very real lessons, right, that have come from the field. These are not textbook lessons that we're giving you, but what both Aisha and Namrata have talked about is really learning from practice the very real challenges that they faced and how they've overcome them. So thanks again for joining us, and thanks to South Asian Women in Media, Dilrukshi for starting us off, and of course Jyoti and the others who've shepherded this series. Thank you all so much.